So today I'm going to be talking about World War I. I will be explaining everything you pretty much need to know about World War I. Things like what started it and what was lost after it ended. Before going into the timeline of World War I, there's one essential term that you should know, which is mania. Mania is an acronym to describe the causes of World War I, which are militarism, alliances, nationalism, imperialism, and assassination. Each of these words were ingredients to a large disaster, whether that be with the building of armies and the desire for dominance with militarism, the false dilemma with people and the formed unions for alliances, the pride and ego the people had for their country for nationalism, the hunger to conquer and to control with imperialism, and lastly, the assassination of Franz Ferdinand. All of these things contributed to making World War I, and is a key thing to remember when thinking back to the 20th century. Now into the history and the timeline of World War I. During the earliest 20th century, much of the world was being colonized and imperialism was all over the globe. This meant that there was competition with the top countries, all competing over the same lands and resources. After the Franco-Prussian War, Germany had just become a new country, making it a new contender for the world's resources and foreign land. Many of the top countries didn't like this, for it meant another country they had to be wary of. This paranoia of Germany grew as Germany became more industrialized and became more powerful as a nation. To counter Germany, the Triple Entente was created, which was an alliance between Russia, France, and Britain. Germany had an alliance of their own, though. This alliance was called the Triple Alliance. It consisted of Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. These two alliances would be the groundwork for setting up World War I, as we go into the assassination of Franz Ferdinand. In June of 1914, Franz Ferdinand was assassinated by Gavrilo Princip, a secret member of the Black Hand organization. The story goes that Gavrilo Princip failed 2 times to assassinate the Archduke. After his 2 failure attempts, Gavrilo Princip went to a coffee shop where he sat there crying in that he failed the mission. Luckily for Gavrilo, Franz Ferdinand just happened to stroll by the coffee shop. It was there where Franz Ferdinand, the Archduke of Austria, was killed by being shot in the head by Gavrilo Princip. After this happened, the Austrian Empire blamed the Serbian government for the wrongdoings and declared war on Serbia. With the Russians backing the Serbians and the Germans backing the Austrians, it was only a matter of time before all of Europe was at war with each other. So, all of Europe began to do an arms race in building the biggest armies and being prepared for when the Great War was about to really begin. At this time, it was known as the Great War. This is because the people thought that another humongous war like this would never occur again. It was even named the War to End All Wars. It wasn't until after it ended and World War II started that they start calling the Great War World War I. Germany, however, felt that it was necessary to attack now, for they knew that Russia was only building an army and did not yet have a good military. This led to the Schlieffen Plan, which was to attack and take over France before Russia and France would attack them from both angles. So Germany would only have to focus on Russia and Britain. 10 days after Austria declared war on Serbia, the plan was executed. This plan, however, failed, with France actually defending their territory and pushing them back to the German borders. Now with France, Britain, and Russia attacking them from all angles, Germany being attacked by all 3 countries was also known as the Western Front. This was the real official start of World War I. Times during the early 20th century were also different, because pretty much all of the countries were at total war, meaning that the entire country was dedicated towards winning the war. An example of this could be like a clothing company not using so much cloth in their products so that they can give more clothes and uniforms to the army. Or if a law comes out with farmers and that they can only sell 40% of their meat and the rest has to go to the army. These are all examples of total war. Along with that, many new rules were put into place, like rationing, which was the level of which people could consume their goods at. An example of this would be like a person cannot buy more than 2 loaves of bread per week, for they have to feed the troops. Another thing were victory gardens, which were personal gardens that families had so they wouldn't be taken away from the government's supply of food. Along with a few other things like propaganda, these are all examples of total war. Now into the war itself and what it was like and who were the leaders during those times. Right as the war began, 2 new teams were formed, the Central Powers and the Allies. The Central Powers consisted of Germany, Austria-Hungary, and newly, the Ottoman Empire. And the Allies remained the same 3 countries, France, Russia, and Britain, later on to be joined by the US. The leaders of the Allies were Tsar Nicholas II, Georges Clemenceau, and David Lloyd George. For the Central Powers, the leaders were Kaiser Wilhelm II, Franz Joseph, and Sultan Mehmed. When the war was just beginning, there were a lot of misconceptions that the people held about the war. Specifically, that it would be glorious and it would be adventurous. This could not be further from the truth, however, since technology and warfare had advanced so much and inventions like the tank, the machine gun, the zeppelin, the airplane, and the flamethrower had been invented, warfare had changed. Running into a battlefield with thousands of men with a bayonet and a rifle would become obsolete because someone from 200 yards away would shoot you the moment you step out of your trench. A lot of people thought that the war would be fought like this, but it didn't go anywhere. The entire war was pretty much fought in the trenches and at a standoff with artillery. The middle of the battlefield was also known as No Man's Land. Self-explanatory since it was pretty much a death zone. No more than 5 miles was ever conquered on either side. The war was just pretty much like a giant standoff of hiding in the bunkers and shooting artillery. Life in the trenches was disturbing and disgusting. Much of the trenches was infested with rats and disease, with many of the men going insane from the horrors of war. These men are called shell-shocked soldiers. That were men that suffered PTSD after spending years in the trenches, many of which only recovered after the war ended, and some didn't recover at all. Along with other things like trench foot, the trenches were a disturbing and disgusting place to be in, killing the fantasy of many young eager men for adventure. Mustard gas was probably the most conventional weapon during this time, for it was the easiest way to get people in the opposing trench. It was an effective weapon in that it could spread into the undergrounds and fill the rooms. The gas was specialized in killing the brain, and those only exposed to the gas suffered permanent brain damage. Pretty much the entire war was fought like this. A few years later, the Russian leader, Tsar Nicholas II, and his current position as emperor fell. This was due to a number of reasons, mainly due to the fact that he wasn't the best leader and he was corrupt in many ways. This led to his death of him and his entire family after the revolution, and a man by the name of Vladimir Lenin taking his place. This chain of events eventually led Russia to quit the war, since Vladimir Lenin believed that Russia shouldn't be fighting the war and should be more focused on developing the country, so they left World War I, leaving only France and Britain to still fight Germany and the other countries, leaving the war in November of 1917, with only then the US to join the Allies in April of 1917. Another reason why the US joined the Allies was because the US was already helping the Allies in the beginning by shipping weapons to Britain via U-boats and cargo ships. Secretly, that is. And when Germany found out that the US was actually secretly supporting Britain, they began attacking any ships that had any military supplies on them, thus further motivating the US to just join the war. The fighting was now between Britain, France, and the US. This was also known as the Eastern Front. This lasted for around 8 months until, on November 11th, 1918, the war finally ended. Germany mainly surrendered due to the fact that they were overpowered, and the war was costing them a lot in terms of resources and men. So when the US joined, it crushed Germany's last sense of hope, and they gave up, knowing that winning the war now would be nearly impossible. The war ended with over 37 million dead, with Germany losing much of its land, with Austria-Hungary being split up into a bunch of countries, and the Ottoman Empire being shrunken down to Turkey. Besides the Central Powers shrinking in size, many other effects were mostly linked to setting up World War II in the years to follow, and the fall of the Habsburgs monarchy and many other bloodlines. This was my summary of World War I, and I hope it was good enough. And I thank you for watching this video, even though it's probably just myself watching it and a few other people I know. But that's the end. Goodbye.